Good evening, everybody. My name is Frankie Flores. I am the director of the LGBTQ Resource Center. We are glad that you are able to join us today for our second event honoring Trans Day Remembrance, on honoring trans lives and celebrating trans resistance. I would like to have my panelists introduce themselves, but before we begin, we would like to start off with our land acknowledgement.
I'm Lazarus, and this is our land acknowledgement. Founded in 1889, the University of New Mexico sits on the traditional homelands of the Pueblo of Sandia. The original peoples of New Mexico, Pueblo, Navajo, and Apache since time immemorial have deep connections to the land and have made significant contributions to the broader community statewide. We honor the land itself and those who remain stewards of this land throughout the generations, and also acknowledge our committed relationship to Indigenous people. We gratefully recognize our history.
Thank you so much, Laz. I think it's important for us to honor the spaces that we are in. So it's great that we're able to start off like that, with that. And since I just mentioned you, we will have to start with you introducing yourself. So can you share with us your name, pronouns, and if you are affiliated with an organization?
Yes, I am Lazarus Letcher, or Laz. I use they, them pronouns, and I'm a graduate assistant at the University of New Mexico's LGBTQ Resource Center. I'm also a PhD student in American Studies and a sometimes professor of Peace Studies. I am happy to be here.
Great. Next, we'll go to Jay.
My name is Jay, or Juno. I use he, him pronouns. And I'm just a student at Albuquerque High.
Thank you. And Miriam.
Hey everyone, I'm Miriam. I am a core member with Albuquerque Mutual Aid and a longtime Albuquerque trans community member. Yeah, I'm really glad to be here. I'm glad to be part of this conversation.
Thank you so much for joining us. I want to start off with, as Laz and I were talking about what we wanted to do for Trans Day Remembrance, we think it's important to honor those who we have lost, but also to celebrate the work that we're doing to make sure that trans folks aren't just surviving, but thriving. And so we wanted to do a panel on discussing surviving and living as trans in 2020. I think that 2020 has thrown all of us for a loop. And, we have showed our survival skills and our resiliency in ways that might be a lot of people don't really understand the ways that we kind of navigate systems, right? And we create our own communities and we create relationships that are sustainable and that are impactful to our day-to-day lives. So we're gonna have some questions. Feel free to answer, don't be shy. For those of you who are on the Zoom, you can actually type in any questions you have in the Q&A. And if you are joining us on Facebook, put your questions in the comments and the comments will be given to us. So I want to start off with just a kind of a base question of how has COVID-19 affected your life? Okay, I'll just start calling on people. Miriam.
Okay, wow. I mean, COVID has affected my life this year in some pretty intense ways. And it has completely removed my secondary mode of income. I did house and pet sitting for 10 years as something that's that's one of the things where within trans communities, we create gig work for ourselves because a lot of times the jobs that are available aren't something that they hold regulations and things around specific pieces, and we don't have protections through any kind of any kind of bureaucracy, any kind of government that makes it okay for us to be who we are in jobs that are normal 9-to-5s with benefits. So my main mode of income is gone because of the fact that people aren't going anywhere. Nobody needs dog walks or someone to come into their home during a pandemic. So that's one of the impacts. And then another impact was starting to see all of these shelves going empty and things happening in different places, and knowing that that was going to be happening here, and then putting out a Google form being y'all, what do we need? And that then snowballed into like working with other folks in community to create Albuquerque Mutual Aid and start getting groceries out to folks. So that's pretty much been my life since March. And like COVID has completely shifted the direction of what my life looked like. So.
Yeah. Wow. Thank you. Thank you for that. Jay.
I had my top surgery scheduled for April, and it was postponed. They just postponed it, and then I had another date set, and then they had to postpone it again, and eventually we were able to move it out to July, and I was able to get it, thankfully.
Mm.
Just as a general thing, getting sick is a huge mental health issue for me. That whole idea is terrifying, so that's been really scary. I also have some other health conditions that would make getting the virus pretty dangerous for me. But the biggest impact was my top surgery, but I'm so glad I was able to get it.
Yeah, I'm glad that you were able to get it also. And Laz.
Yeah, so I was teaching in person when COVID hit. So for me, it was a lot of scrambling and a lot of concern for my students, some of whom I just still haven't heard from since COVID hit. So just trying to completely revamp that and then working 2 other jobs from home. I'm also part of the addiction recovery community, and it's been interesting trying to figure out what do meetings look like outside of not having our usual clubhouses or the churches that we usually meet in being closed, and like trying to figure out how to reach folks that don't have internet access and kind of patch up those gaps in access to recovery services has been a big focus too of mine during this time. Then my roommate moved out like the week before COVID hit, so also adjusting to living alone and trying not to get too sucked into isolation. But I have a dog, so she's been the rock star of COVID for me.
What are your feelings towards the medical establishment, and do these feelings add to your concerns with COVID-19? And Jay, you kind of touched on this a little bit, so maybe we'll start with you.
All of my medical experiences so far in my life have been positive. I was once when I had to go to urgent care, I was once mistaken for an MTF, which was interesting, which made me feel kind of good that I pass enough that I would be seen as male to female, I guess. But all of my experiences have been pretty genuinely like okay. With my top surgeon, he was an incredible person, and everybody there was really wonderful. But with COVID, obviously, I've seen so many people not able to get the healthcare or the medical things that they need, which is scary, especially for people who really need this kind of stuff.
Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing that, Jay. Laz?
Yeah, so I've always been scared of doctors, and it's definitely like inherited generational trauma from the way Black folks have been treated by the medical industrial complex, and like add being trans to that, and it's just like mwah, chef's kiss. Like a month ago, I had to go to the ER. Just had really intense abdominal pain and couldn't walk, couldn't breathe, but still army crawled to my closet to get a sweater that had my alma mater on it, because I know when I go to the doctor, they see a Black dude with tattoos that's maybe looking for drugs. And I was like, but I went to a fancy college, so please view me as human. And it just really upset me that like I couldn't function, but I still had that thought of like, well, I need to do this if I want to be treated as a human when I get to the ER. But I had an incredible experience once I got there. And it's funny doing safe zone trainings for the hospital and being on committees for the hospital and talking to med students and like being able to see that needle shift. But that's definitely been one of my fears of getting COVID is like, what happens if they like cut my shirt open and see my top surgery scars? Is that going to like impact my care? And the fact that I wasn't willing to go to the ER until I could no longer walk. And I know a lot of other trans folks that will delay care out of fear. But I know in Albuquerque, I've seen some positive changes, especially at like the student health center.
Thank you, Laz. And Miriam?
Yeah, I mean, in general, for me, I have been like taking all of the precautions that I possibly can because of the kind of like community work that I'm doing. But it's also something that's definitely scary for me. Like I don't want to go to a hospital. I don't like interacting with doctors. It's not only something where it's like dealing with things around like being treated poorly as a visible trans person or being visible as like a not standard binary person. That it's just like it's difficult with that. But then adding on top of that, when they're like, okay, well, step onto the scale, and I'm like, no thanks, I don't actually do that. I believe that in like health at any size, and that like you should look up Hayes, you should like check this out, check out Dr. Lindo Bacon, who's also a non-binary person who like has fought a lot around people being able to like have interruptions of fat phobia in healthcare that intersects with trans stuff for a lot of people. So just like those different pieces of it are difficult, but it's also like it's not something that feels safe to me. Like I'm 37 years old and I've never felt safe in a doctor's office. So I feel even less so now.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that, for being vulnerable with that. I want to introduce one of our other panelists. She is really a pillar in New Mexico overall, and I'm just so honored that you're able to join us today, Maddie Jim. So if you would like to introduce yourself.
Okay, you can hear me?
Yes.
Okay, ja, Arnold Scotia, Mary Jim and Shenash, Intergenerational, Kiani, but she's chain, Twombahan, the shade up, and a Jenny, the Chanel 8 of the Nenchland. Hi everyone, I'm Maddie Jim of the Zuni People Clan, born for the Tyrant House People Clan. I originally come from a place called Sanaushton, where I grew up. And I'm happy to be here. Thank you for inviting me. And I hope I can give you all the information you need or whatever you need me to do. Just tell me and I will speak about it.
Thank you, Maddie. So the question we're on right now is, what are your feelings towards the medical establishment? And do these feelings add to your concerns with COVID-19?
So it all depends on where you're at and where you're seeking service, I feel. So like for me, getting medical services, I'm confident and with my medical care and getting my hormone treatment, getting my trans affirming care from the hospital, because I go to Indian Health Services and I get my treatment there. Plus I'm also on Truvada. I'm on PrEP. So I take PrEP. So being on that and the doctors being knowledgeable in it and working with me, knowing that I'm a trans woman, a trans person, and the hospital also knowing that trans people do get services there. No, I think not there in Albuquerque, but in Gallup, they also have a trans clinic. So depending on where you're getting services, I'm also part of a ECHO program with the Northwest Portland Area Indian Health Board and IHS, and they do like clinical stuff with their doctors and mental health services and talk about cases within Indian Health Services to how to provide like proper health care. And I'm one of their peer faculty, which I'm like fabulous being a part of. And also I think being a part of a committee where we are changing some of that dynamics and writing policies to have gender affirming care for our populations. And I think there are a lot of people out there who are trans organizations that are teaching and training medical providers, not just in the clinics and hospitals, but also at the schools. Because I know Adrian goes into UNM and talks to the nursing students and then also mental health services. And also when service medical staff are going to school, I know Adrian goes in and does trainings, which is great and fabulous. So I think there are things that are being done, but unfortunately there is that percentage of doctors or clinicians or hospitals that don't have that education, or they may not reach out, or it could be because of personal beliefs themselves of how they treat someone. So I feel positive because I want to look at a solution oriented component where we're going to change these things. And I believe in the coming years, we are going to definitely gain momentum in getting healthcare services that are good for us, for affirming for us to go to and stuff. So we still have work to do, but we'll get there.
Yeah, thank you so much, Maddie. Thank you so much for that. Um, has this pandemic interfered with trans-related services in your life? I'm going to start with Laz.
A little bit. There's like been whispers of testosterone shortages around the country, and I know Albuquerque's been partially impacted, but it's been like impossible for me to get a full script filled. So I have to go to the pharmacy way more than I used to in the past, and that's like a place I don't want to be right now is the pharmacy.
Yeah.
Like, I'm trying to keep myself as healthy as possible. So it's been really frustrating not being able to get that full script. And then I've had to reach out, and thank goodness, like trans people have been doing mutual aid forever. Like I ran out of needles and syringes and like could not find them. I just went on Instagram and a trans person just hit me up. They're like, yep, I've got a year's supply. Come just like pick them up from my porch. I'm like, bless. But yeah, that's probably been the biggest thing. It's just this weird testosterone shortage we seem to be going through.
Mm, Miriam.
Can you repeat the question? I'm sorry.
Yeah. Has the pandemic interfered with trans-related services in your life?
Not specifically any that I can think of, other than it making it like it's a lot more difficult to be able to like connect with actual trans community. Like Zoom is great and it's really good to be able to like see one another face to face, but there's nothing that can replace the actual feeling of trans community.
Yeah.
And I think that that's like impacted a lot of people, especially on like mental health levels. So
Yeah. Thank you for that. Jay, you kind of touched on this earlier when you were talking about getting top surgery. So do you want to maybe elaborate on that a little bit more?
Yes. It was a huge letdown to have been waiting for. I've been out for almost 5 years now. To have been waiting for so long for this, like what everyone says is life-changing surgery, and then to have that just taken away. And I'm not a very positive. Like I'm pretty pessimistic. So it was really because I had gotten myself so like finally ready. I mentally prepared for surgery. I have hospital PTSD. I prepared to be in this environment, and then to have that taken away twice, which isn't a lot, but it was twice is still too much.
Yeah.
It was really awful, but yet again I got it, so that was good. But also I'm missing my trans community, missing a lot of my friends my age who are trans, and being able to talk to them and talk about our transitions and all of that is really difficult to not have right now.
Yeah. I also just want to honor that, we have a 15-year-old person on this call who is talking about trans surgery. Like, that is such a powerful moment. And I want to just honor and recognize how powerful it is that you're able to live in your holistic self at 15. Like, that just, it makes my heart so warm. I think that for people who are a little bit more mature, we didn't really, that wasn't something that I ever thought would really be a reality in my lifetime. So I just want to thank you for that. And, it's so powerful. Maddie, you kind of touched on it also, but do you want to elaborate on how the pandemic has affected trans services for you?
I think it has, like everybody else, I been accessing services. Like I'm fortunate to call in my prescriptions and pick them up in a tent outside at Indian Health Services. So there's a mechanism that I could follow and get my medications. But right now, because of the guidelines that's in place, I believe that we can't go in to see the doctor. And I'm due for an appointment. So, but I have enough medications to last me until I make my next appointment. So I'm crossing my fingers to get that done. And my thoughts also too is not just me, but also my community back home. Like if you're living on the reservation, how's this affecting you? How is it affecting you to get to the hospital? Because sometimes our population has to hitchhike to the hospital to get services. Ride or arrange a ride and stuff. So because of COVID and people staying away from each other and social distancing, practicing safety, how does this affect that? And then also they don't have access to mail mail medications unless it's arranged. So I'm really thinking about that also too. So kind of
Mm,
box and not just me. But I'm fortunate to get healthcare services that I could call. And then also I think for me internally, like being creative on doing stuff. So I have resources, I have networks that I do to see how I could problem solve what I need to. So yeah.
mm. Yeah, and you touched on something that maybe I want to elaborate on. Something I've been really thinking about is access to even like masks, right? I think we have we have a very large unsheltered population in New Mexico, and something I think about continuously is access to masks and access to even like hand sanitizer or just being able to wash your hands. Like, how do you navigate that? So, does anyone have any thoughts or want to expand on that conversation a little bit?
I could start.
Yeah.
I think it depends on who you reach out to or who you work with. I know that we're fortunate to have gotten donations from like from Phoenix with the the Grand Canyon Sisters of Perpetual Indulgence who
Mm,
provided masks before, and they're going to donate some more again, I believe. And then our clinic and getting donations at our clinic, and we do have extra masks in our programs. Like we have harm reduction services, so we do syringe exchange, and sometimes when somebody doesn't have a mask, they know to come to the program to get a mask for them, to
mm,
possibly come to the clinic also too, or if somebody needs a mask, we have a few extra that we could give, and I also have extra masks that I could help too in that process. So I think just access to it and seeing where you can get it. And then
mhm,
also like calling around does help, but not everybody has that access. And with unsheltered populations too, we try to give mats to the population if needed, if and stuff. So yeah.
yeah. Thank you for that. Anybody else want to add to that? Miriam.
Yeah, thank you. First of all, thank you, Maddie, so much. I actually have been like super inspired by your work for years. So it's an honor to be here with you
Yeah.
today.
Thank you.
And yeah, like with the work that you're doing, that's definitely inspired a lot of stuff around like what we're doing with Albuquerque Mutual Aid and the ways that we're like working to create different networks. And within that, we've also started like there's separate folks that I'm working with that we're in the process of forming a harm reduction collective here in town that's going to be distributing different supplies and not necessarily trying to reinvent the wheel, but getting input from other groups that are doing harm reduction about like where the gaps are that they need support so that we can offer that. We were really lucky at the beginning of the pandemic with getting a huge donation of masks from Pueblo Action Alliance through Albuquerque Mutual Aid. And we've been distributing those to folks through folks who like request for care packages online or also unsheltered folks who come to our distribution center downtown. Because we will make like day packs for folks and include a few masks and like hand wipes, hand sanitizer, body wipes, and like just different snacks and things that can get them through for the day. So it really is just about like kind of like changing also the narrative that we have in our community and just in the community of Albuquerque in general around the ways that we treat unsheltered relatives. Because there is like a lot of times when you are in like deep poverty and you make it to where you at least have a roof over your head, sometimes you start to feel like you're better than someone who doesn't. And
Mhm,
that gets shown really deeply a lot of times
mm,
here in town. And so I want to work to try to change that. And I feel like we have the ability to do that, especially as trans people who have a lot of relatives who have been unsheltered or who are currently unsheltered or who will be unsheltered. The people
mhm.
who we like, I have a blow up mattress in my living room because anytime that someone needs a place, that's there. That's what we do as trans people.
Yeah.
So I'm excited to see the ways that we can work together to try to like create more ways of providing protection to our community and specifically the ones who are most impacted by this virus.
Yeah, and I really want to, emphasize what you had said about, those of us who are sheltered, we feel this privilege, right, and this disconnect. And I think that so many of us sometimes forget that most of us, right, are one or two steps away from being unsheltered ourselves. And so, I think that it's important for all of us to recognize that privilege and how that, interacts our lives. As somebody who grew up, you know, being unsheltered for a very long time and also just growing up very poor, like the fact that I can pay my bills and pay, get food and still have money left over for like luxury items is something that like constantly astounds me. I was a couple of weeks ago, I was very excited because I was able to invest in a quality cookware set. And I was so excited about it. And like I had done research and been going on and on about it. And it was this moment of like, I am financially secure enough to be able to buy, right? Instead of going, having to like hodgepodge it together or hand me downs, right? So I think it's important for all of us who are listening in or who are thinking about this, right? How does our privilege color the way that we, interact day to day? And how does that privilege, play out, especially like in COVID, And speaking of that privilege, I want to talk about how has mask wearing affected your life? Like specifically, are there fears of being seen as something else? Is there fears of being misgendered? So does anybody want to start? Looking at you, Laz.
Yeah, it's been interesting, and I've heard from other non-binary folks where like they'll go into a shop, and some shops have been like saying like "hello, sir" or "ma'am" because like the masks have just thrown off their perception of gender, and I'm like, or we could just get rid of those honorifics in general. That might be good. But for me, like a lot of my fear is race-based. Like it's less in Albuquerque, but where I grew up in the Midwest, like I always got followed in stores. Like I'm the black kid, I'm obviously stealing. No, like it's like going into stores with my face covered. Like I notice I definitely do get anxious and go out of my way to seem like as unsuspicious as possible. Which is shitty that I have to self-police myself in that way, but especially with like the the tone this summer and that being at the forefront of my mind every time I left the house is like, is this the time I get shot? And like having my face covered definitely adds to that anxiety, but I will do it because I am not a giant baby. And I care about my community, and it is not that hard to wear a mask. So please wear a mask.
Yeah. I feel like, and this isn't, universal because no experience is universal, but I feel like within the trans and queer community, there's almost an ease to wearing a mask because we have grown up in an environment where we take care of each other. Like I think about like in the 90s, right? We were raising money to, so people could be buried, so we could have funeral service for people, so we could, raising money so that people who were living with AIDS could have access to medication. And I think that like that has always kind of been a thought within the trans and queer community, like we take care of each other. So I think that like mask wearing is just an extension of that. So thank you for touching on that, Laz. Anybody else?
Yeah, I have something to add to that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that it's first of all, it's definitely provided us all an opportunity to show the fact that there's been a lot of work that's put in by both ancestors and current folks in our communities around public health and around reminding us that like this is being said about this thing and this is real. This is a virus. And like immediately you hear a virus and it's like, oh shit, excuse my language. It's like, oh, like this is what's happening. This is like, we have experienced this before. Our community is better prepared to deal with this than other communities in general because of what we have to bring to the table regarding fighting a virus and surviving a virus. And so it's like we have that. Also, like the positive piece of masks is like a thing. I haven't been told to smile by a man in months, and I love it. Also, like I've been able to order some really cool masks, so it's an entirely new option for fashion, and that's like a thing because we all look amazing all the time. I'm better at it than everybody. So, I mean, like everyone is definitely beautiful in their own way, but trans people are definitely the trendsetters when it comes to like being able to love yourself completely. So, yeah, but those are my that's been my like thankfulness for masks is that like yes, it's keeping us safe and it also gives us another way to look fabulous.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, for me, I want to touch on the smiling because I do smile at people and I forget I'm wearing a mask. I'm like, oh, they can't see your smile. I'm like, just and I just walk by them. So I'm like, oh.
Jay, do you want to add anything to that?
right when this whole thing started, right when it was like still pretty early in it, and you were told to wear the mask, but it was still like you could go into stores and such. I had to use the bathroom at one of the stores, and it's one of those where you have to unlock, where the person who works there has to unlock it. And he went and he unlocked the girls' bathroom, and I was like,
Oof.
"I'm sorry," and I lowered my voice as I do when I talk to people out in the world. I really hate that I do that, but it's just something I learned to do. And I was like, "I'm sorry, I need to use the men's restroom." And he was like, "Oh, I'm so sorry, sir." But it was just like, but it was right before my top surgery, and that really cut me down. I feel like if that were to happen now, I'd be a little less hurt by it. It still hurts, but I'd be a little more like, it would have not affected me as much as it did.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that, Jay. 2020 has brought attention to issues like white supremacy and racial inequality in this country. How does white supremacy intersect with your trans identity?
Is it okay if I talk?
Yeah.
Cool. White supremacy intersects with my trans identity because I am a white person and by default racist. So there is very specific work around unpacking that is my everyday challenge, and that will continue to be my everyday challenge for as long as I'm alive. And so that's definitely like part of how it intersects with with the work that I'm doing, and it also intersects in the ways that like this specifically is something that like I want to encourage more white trans people to be like, hey, like, yes, like this is work that we need to be doing. And this is not something that we need to like leave everyone else to talk about. And if there are other like trans folks of color who are speaking on this subject, we need to be paying them to do so, or do something that shows them that they're valuable in our lives and working with them towards their liberation.
Yeah, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you for sharing that. Maddie, Jay.
Yeah. Definitely. Well, how I'm Hispanic, Latino, and growing up as a young trans person of color, you don't see trans people of color in your community. It's all, and you see the one body type, the very skinny white trans man with a small chest who could get top surgery, but they don't need it, that they don't necessarily have to. And growing up with that, and early in my transition, it was awful. And growing up, even I would go to sleep and I would kind of wish to whatever that I would wake up and I'd be white, because it seemed so much easier for white kids. And I didn't really experience, well, I had experienced prejudice, but I didn't really understand it until right after the 2016 election. That was when I was hit with like just blatant in my face racism. And I've struggled with that for these past 4 years, because people have been conditioned to think it's okay, because that was what our president was doing, was being racist. And so people would automatically assume that that was just how it was going to be.
Yeah.
I've finally seen a lot more trans people of color now, and it's so exciting to see people who are like me, who look like me, instead of just the cookie cutter what everyone thinks of when they think of a trans man.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. Maddie, Laz?
For me, how white supremacy intersects with my identity is that throughout the generations, the word colonization. It started with colonization. So people learning how to hate not just me, but my people, people of this land, and getting the ideologies. And I think to this day, we still have that. And it's very prevalent in the communities where we see it. And because of colonization, assimilation, acculturation, all that plays a part of it too. Looking at generational historical trauma, it's affected my culture, my language, our traditions, us as Native people, especially within Native people, and having somebody feel superior and telling a certain population what's right and what's wrong when they're not of that population. And I think about it in ways where I do have conversations with people and it gets me angry. It gets me angry because it's more than just the white supremacy topic. It's everything else that the ideologies of going back to colonization and just trying to commit genocide within populations. And yeah, that could be a whole
Thank you.
talk and presentation.
Thank you so much, Maddie. Laz.
Yeah, just going off Maddie Jim too. I mean, like, the existence of transphobia is an extension of white supremacy. Like, we know that there were genders outside and beyond the gender binary here, and like where my community's from in West Africa, and like I don't know if I would identify as trans if I had those words indigenous to my people to describe myself. So I've been wrestling with that a lot lately. And then, you know, this summer was really hard being Black, and it was really frustrating seeing white trans people be like, oh my God, did you know racism still exists? And it's like, I've been telling you. I've been telling you for years. Thank you for letting me know that you weren't listening. And that was just really, really frustrating to recognize that, like, I've been kind of screaming into this void. And like the other thing that was difficult this summer, especially, was the murder of Tony McDade, who was a Black trans man killed by the Tallahassee PD. He was killed days after George Floyd. And the reception and the reaction to that within the Black community was so much different. And it was really devastating to see. And I would go to these Black Lives Matter protests, and I would come with a Tony McDade sign, and I would usually be the only one with a sign with his name, or try to start a chant, and people would be like, who is that? And so, like, trying to unpack and process too the ways that this white supremacist belief of transphobia and homophobia, the way that that has like leaked into the Black community, and that's not, you know, that's not the way we should be. Like, that's not inherent to our peoples. Like, that is a colonial byproduct. That is a white byproduct. Transphobia and homophobia are colonial imports. And so just like trying to, as we're saying Black Lives Matter, trying to make people remember that means all Black lives matter. And, you know, we don't have to start with Black men and work our way down. You know, trickle down liberation is bullshit. It's bubble up. And when Black trans women's life expectancy is no longer 35, we're all going to do a lot better. And so, like, what warmed my heart this summer was seeing marches in LA and New York where tens of thousands of people marched for Black trans lives. Like, I did not expect to see that in my lifetime. And so that gives me a lot of hope. But, like, I need white people in the trans and queer community to know that, like, being queer and trans does not absolve you of racism.
Thank you for sharing that. There was actually something in the Q&A I wanted to share with everybody, from Melody Sky Sun, who says, if anyone needs customized masks, I've been making them, and I can make a free one for anyone who needs. They're double-sided 100% cotton with a metal strip in the nose for better fit. They're reversible, and you can choose whatever patterns, colors that you'd like. And I can even look for additional fabric if wanted. And then in the Q&A, there is a folder with masks that I've already made for people, as well as all the fabrics I have currently. So if anyone is in need of a mask or knows somebody who needs a mask, please check that out in the Q&A. I have a question specifically. We're going to go into some specific questions now, starting with Miriam. Albuquerque Mutual Aid has proven to be a lifeline for many folks. Can you speak to the way that trans and gender nonconforming folks create community solidarity and what that means to you?
Absolutely. Thank you. I love that question. I mean, community solidarity within trans and queer community is what keeps us alive. The overt structures of society that exist do not have space for us and do not want to make space for us a lot of times. Most times. And it is very difficult to be able to try to push even just a little bit to get some stuff done that benefits us. So we, in the meantime, have to create different systems and different processes and different resources to be able to count on when we know that nothing else is something that we can count on. And so that's like mutual aid, like Albuquerque Mutual Aid is definitely leaning on like the core tenets of mutual aid that are like community involvement, and like to each person that is speaking their need, they can have that met with whatever it is that we have. Like, we give what we have, we take what we need, we ask for what we need. And that's the beautiful piece of it, is because within that asking is a piece of vulnerability. You don't have to go through the world in this individualistic idea of like, oh, I'm going to get everything done, pull myself up by the bootstraps, and I have to work really hard to be able to put food on the table. It's like, no, you can actually just say like, I really need help getting food on the table because stuff is really hard right now, and be met by a community that's like, you know what, got you, no problem. Don't worry about it. You don't need to fill out like a whole bunch of different information or prove that you need it. Like, we'll be there tomorrow or the next day with some groceries and it'll be on your doorstep. You'll get a text. It's all good. Like, you don't have to do anything for it. You don't have to ask, you don't have to ask for anything extra. You don't have to do anything extra or give anything back. Just be part of a community that cares about each other. Like, there are so many times where there have been different things where like we get texts from people being like, oh, well, there's this one thing or another thing within my package that I couldn't use, but I'm gonna like pass it on. Or like we encourage people, like if there's a driver who's like, oh, I couldn't find this address today. And we're like, okay, well, we'll call them and get it tomorrow. If you see someone on the way home that needs food, give that to them. So it really is just this piece of like living in a place of abundance rather than a place of scarcity, because scarcity is created by colonialism and capitalism. And the abundance that we deserve as human beings that we've created with and for one another is something that a lot of times only folks who are building their own communities have the ability to see. And so I'm really excited about the ways that we're bringing that to the table for a larger community and being able to share in these different traditions of taking care of one another that were very specifically modeled to us by the original inhabitants of this space. So, yeah.
Ooh, that's powerful. Thank you so much for sharing that.
Yeah.
So, Maddie, Jim, the Indigenous community has been particularly affected by COVID-19. Can you share how this has impacted trans and gender nonconforming Indigenous people, and how can we specifically support them?
I kind of mentioned it earlier that with Native populations, we have people in urban settings, tribal. So how do we provide those services to the populations that are at need? I know within Albuquerque, we do have unsheltered Native trans people who are trying to access services. Some do get it, some others are still waiting. COVID has really affected some of the services and going into getting those services. And like I said, on the reservation, the possibility of getting medications or getting by doctors could be affected by the COVID. Um, so it's also situational. So across the board, I think just reaching out to the community and see what can be provided to them, especially in forms of like donations or what is needed for them to function. Do they need gift cards or food cards that could possibly be happening because food is scarce. People are getting in line to buy essentials again and getting the TP and doing stuff. And how can we provide service to them? Um, yeah, and COVID that's affecting our tribal communities. I believe that our population also accesses those services that are giving out food at the chapter houses or giving out the essentials that are needed, and they also partake in that because with native communities, we are of the community. So getting assistance within the community is there, but I think for us to look out for each other, I think is also a big thing too, because sometimes getting services through just general community sometimes could be hard or nerve wracking. But if it were to come from our own community, for us, by us, with us, I think that'd be a lot easier.
Yeah. And you touched on something I really want to emphasize about resources, right? And making sure that we're not hoarding, right? That we are not going to the stores and we are not buying out all of the toilet paper, all of those essential needs, because the reality is that some of us have the privilege, right, of being able to buy multiples of an item, but the reality is that there's so many folks, right, who they can buy only one roll at a time. They can only buy, one carton of eggs at a time. So being mindful of that, when we are taking too much, that means that somebody is going without. And, recognizing the privilege in that. So thank you for bringing that up, Maddie, Jim.
Yeah, I think one hint that I want to give people, like for me, when I need to go get something, I wait till like 30 minutes before closing, and I know what items I'm going to get. And when I do go to the stores, there's usually hardly any people. And I don't know how it is tonight, but usually that's my kind of like thing that I do. And I've gone to stores where I didn't have to wait in line or see that many people checking out and stuff, and that for me that feels good because I'm in less contact with a little bit amount of people, and for me that's better. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you, Mary Jane. Jay, as a younger trans person, what are some ways folks can support you and other young folks who are transitioning?
I did not get an opportunity to come out to my family. My school outed me. They told my parents. I had made these notes to give out to teachers who I trusted that told them, this is my name, this is my preferred pronouns, this is what's happening, because I wasn't sure how to come out to my parents yet. I knew they would be accepting. They've always provided this accepting like household of anything and everything. But I was still scared because coming out even is a really big deal. But I was referred to the school counselor and she asked me if I needed help to come out to my parents, and I told her, no, I've got this. And I come home to find out that my parents have been told by the school. And it was horrifying. It was one of the worst moments of my life to have that taken away from me. So one of the big things that people need to understand is that it's someone's narrative and you cannot take that away from somebody. You need to respect them. You need to respect that that is their thing to say, and it's really good to provide a safe environment for trans people to know that they're accepted and that they can come out. It's really awful to out people, and that is forever been one of my biggest things that I've advocated against is outing and how harmful it can be, because even though my parents were very accepting, I could have easily been in a home environment where it wasn't. You never know what somebody's home life is like or their work life or anything. You never know. And that is why it's so important to not out people. So that's the biggest thing that I can advocate against.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that, Jay. And you know, I'm sorry that you went through that. That's a horrific experience. But thank you also for being brave enough to talk about it. It's so, I think, affirming to me. And again, I've said this before, but I want to just reiterate. It's so affirming to us, right, who have done this work for a while, that we are creating platforms for you to be able to come out at such a young age. And so, to have that trust betrayed is a horrific feeling. And so we just want to, I want to make sure that we honor that feeling and that we are also just respecting and honoring you. So thank you again for being here with us. Laz, you were teaching when the pandemic hit and holding space for a trans peer support group. What does trans support look like in online spaces?
Yeah, and I just want to start off by saying thank you to everyone that's on this call. I think I'm the only person in the lucky position to know all of the panelists, and it's really lovely to have you all in this space. So thank you for sharing your hearts and your knowledge with us. Yeah, so trans support online definitely looks different, and I think everyone's touched on that, how much we're missing our trans family in person right now. And one of the unique challenges I've had running trans support groups online is not everyone being out at home. So I'd say like a large portion of the trans peer group that I lead had to go back in the closet to go home, which broke my heart. So having to be hyper aware of like if a parent walks in the room, like doing a quick pivot and pretending we're a study group, or I've pretended to be a youth pastor, which horrifies me. But just like doing what I can so that these people can continue to access this space. And that means also like not wearing shirts that have queer or trans messages, which is most of my clothing, and like having to be hyper vigilant in a way because of my privilege I haven't had to in a long, long time. And yeah, just that's something I want to draw attention to, is how many college students had to go back in the closet, or how many students who at school were able to be out but are not able to be out at home, and how difficult it is even like on Zoom to have your name and your pronoun there when you don't know if your parents are going to walk in the room. So just trying to always be mindful of like who's falling through the gaps as we move to these completely digital platforms.
Yeah.
And I have students that I still haven't heard from since March. Like I slash and burned my syllabus. I was like, y'all don't need to be turning in essays in the middle of a global pandemic. Like, my class is very far down your list of concerns right now. Like, you turn in what you can turn in and you're gonna get an A in this class. I had them all do essays on self-care, which like was really affirming to me too, to just know like, okay, you're taking showers, you're eating, like that makes my heart happy. But like, for educators, it's such a weird spot to be at, to not physically see your students, and especially my queer and trans students, and not know if they were safe and not know if they're okay.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. We have 5 minutes left, so we're going to start closing up, and I have a 2-part question for all of you. What are some last words you would like to share with our audience? And if you could say anything to our trans elders who have came before us, what would you like to say to them? And we're going to start with Maddie Jim.
Can you repeat that again? I'm sorry, I drew a blank.
Yeah, no, you're fine. What last words would you like to share with our audience? And if you could tell our trans elders anything, what would you tell them?
So the first part, to the audience, people who are listening, thank you for listening. Thank you for tuning in, and thank you for having this. It's always great to have dialogue, discussions, hear about different perspectives from different people. And I just want to say that we continue to fight, we continue to move forward as individuals, about empowerment, self-discovery, continue to move forward, finding solutions for our community, always having that voice to stand up for not just ourselves, but for others. And I'm really happy to have grown so much and try to give back to the community at hand and to my elders, which sometimes I feel like I'm becoming an elder also too. My elders, who didn't even have the word transgender at the time they were mentoring or talking to me. Like I only heard of transgender in the late 1990s when I started. So it's grown so much. But my elders before me were the queens who instilled in me some of the teachings that I kind of hold dear to my heart, of not just speaking our language, but also carrying forward on who we are as a people and a person. Even though I pushed away my identity of a native, being native in my mid school and high school years, I regained that at a young adult age and learned almost quickly from my elders on different things and different topics. So like a lot of times they say that we stand on the shoulders of our ancestors. I feel like I'm carrying them on my shoulders because I want to bring them with me forward and thank them for that. So I kind of look at it in that sense now. So I'm very grateful and humbled and honored.
Wow, thank you for sharing that, Maddie. Whew. Miriam.
Yeah. I think that the thing that I want to say to everyone who has come today is thank you for being here and for listening to trans people. Try to do more of that in your life. And also, like, I want to challenge folks that the next time that they see someone and have this automatic reaction of thinking that that person doesn't deserve the help that they're asking for, to stop and question why they think that. And to remember that as a community, as like a trans community, as a queer community, we have such incredible power to be able to share with the world. And we can do it as long as we are doing it in ways that are actually like genuine to our hearts and are actually like meeting someone where they're at and offering them what they need and not what we think they need. And the things that I would say to those who came before is that, like, I'm sorry that shit was so hard, and that, like, I am so appreciative to be able to be amongst a lineage of people who cares for one another in such beautiful ways.
Thank you for sharing that, Miriam. Laz.
Yeah, I just want to thank everyone for coming, and thank the panelists again. And to all the trans people that are listening, I want you to know that you are seen and you are loved. and you are not alone. And to the cis people, pay us, give us money. And pronouns are not the end all be all of understanding the trans experience. That's the tip of the iceberg. So just to echo what other people were saying, continue to listen, and not just during Trans Awareness Week. Because for us, every week, we're very aware of the trans existence, and you should be too. And to the ancestors, I want to say thank you for fighting. It was not in vain. And thank you for this blueprint for this beautiful life. And we are not done doing what you have done for us.
Thank you. Thank you. And we'll end with Jay.
To those who came to this, I'm really thankful because it's really so important to listen to trans voices. To those who came before me, it's a really big thank you for paving the way and letting me be able to come into a world where I can express myself at such a young age and be heard and loved. So it's a huge thank you to those who came before me.
Thank you. Thank you all so much for being here with us tonight. Thank you so much to our panelists. This has been a amazing experience, right? And a way for us to reframe Transgender Day of Remembrance, right? And celebrating trans resistance and honoring those who we have lost, right? And knowing that we are continuing this work, so that we are losing less people as we continue. I do want to also mention that we are having our Transgender Day of Remembrance visual tomorrow night at 6 p.m. We will be doing this live. We will unfortunately not be streaming it to our Facebook page because we will actually have some amazing performers who will be joining us tomorrow. So it will not be on Facebook, but please join us here on Zoom. Thank you all so much and have a wonderful night.
Good night, everyone. Thank you.
Good night. Thank y'all.
Thank you.